welcome back to the White Coat Club. My name is Lindsay, and I am one of the counselors at Moon Prep. And as always, I've got Nicole here with me. And today we're going to be discussing how you should prepare for the early decision 2 deadlines. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and so you can get more great content about direct med and undergrad admissions news. Okay, so Nicole, tell us, what is decision 2?
Yeah, early decision 2, really similar to early decision 1. It is a later deadline and a second option for students who want that early decision pathway. So if you ED1 to a school and you get denied, it's kind of a second chance to apply early decision somewhere else. Same level of I'm committed, I'm interested, a little bit higher of those acceptance rates to have a chance of acceptance.
Yeah, so essentially same rules as ED1, just later. You can pick one.
Yep.
And the big thing, I know Nicole said it, but I'm going to say it again for the people in the back, because I think that my students always ask this question: if I got denied from ED1, can I apply it again, ED2 or regular decision? Nope, it's over. You've been rejected. And so you got to move on to your next one. Or even if you're deferred, that means you can apply to an early decision 2 school.
Yeah, just not the same school. So typically, early decision 1, if we're talking about timeline, you're going to apply by November 1st. You'll find out, sometime in December. And then those ED2 deadlines are like the first week in January. Sometimes it's, 1/1, sometimes it's like 1/3, depending, maybe that Monday. They can vary a little bit, but just a couple weeks after you would receive that acceptance or that denial.
Honestly, it's like the same kind of like date a lot of the times as like the regular decision for this school. The deadline won't really vary. So like if you're planning to do regular decision for it versus early decision 2, it's not like you necessarily have to change your timeline for writing your essays, because it's going to be the same thing either way.
Yep.
However, that being said, I always think it's a good idea to kind of think about your early decision 2 kind of schools as you're like making your list, just so you have like those options. One big thing to note too is like not every school will have ED2. A lot of schools will have, a lot more like private schools will have like early decision 1, but the list of like ED schools, we were kind of looking at it before, it's maybe like 30 to 50 schools in total. And so making sure that, as you're making your strategy for applying to colleges, that the school you want to go to has ED2. If you have like a top school, maybe your second choice has ED2, that could be your strategy. But some schools that do have like ED2 are going to be like Case Western, U Chicago, Boston University, Boston College, Emory, Carnegie Mellon, Johns Hopkins, Northeastern, and NYU, Tufts. Like the list definitely goes on and on. We do have like a complete list on our website of early decision 2 schools, and we'll be sending out an updated list here probably pretty soon. So you can just kind of use that in your strategies as you make your early decision 2 strategies.
Yeah, you made a really great point too. Like if you're talking about ED1, I think you should subsequently be talking about ED2 potentially. I feel like year after year, I have students who are like, absolutely, I'm EDing to this school, and we never really talk. They don't really mention much about ED2, and it's kind of like, well, if that was your number one choice, then for sure, apply ED1 for it, whatever. But unfortunately, if December rolls around, they get denied, then all of a sudden they want to jump into, well, where should I ED2? I want to ED2. And sometimes a lot of the schools that have ED2 maybe weren't even on their original college list. It's kind of something that they end up scrambling for and just wanting to pick one, which like is not really anything we ever recommend. So I think that if you're having conversations about EDing in general, it should be kind of the entire picture.
Completely agree. You don't want to make like an emotional decision in December, like December 15th, when your your ED2 deadlines are kind of right around the corner, just 2 weeks away. It's a lot of decisions that need to be made in a short amount of time. So really at this point, it's going to be like mid-November right now, hopefully, as you're listening to this. And so if you are thinking about like an ED2 school, maybe you did apply ED1, maybe you didn't. you start thinking now before you even find out if you did get into your early decision one school, if it's right for you, just so you don't have to make like a last minute, like emotional choice.
Yeah, and then you're also not writing last minute essays, of now we have 2 or 3 weeks to pull something together that is going to be worthy of an early decision application.
And sometimes too, when it comes to strategy, I will have kids who are kind of picking between two schools, like maybe like a Duke and an Emory. So Duke has only early decision one, whereas Emory has early decision one and early decision two. So like maybe that's part of our strategy too, between picking between those. If all else things were equal, it's like, well, maybe we do Duke for ED1. And if that fails, then we have Emory as like our ED2 option because it is like your second choice. And so once again, that could be kind of important because if we did it the opposite way, Emory for ED1, Duke doesn't have ED2. So you'd be kind of, stuck applying to regular decision for Duke. So that having that strategy early can be really helpful. Now, the one I would say like big drawback of early decision two is kind of like the statistical side of things. I'm not going to lie, it's really hard to find stats for ED2 only. A lot of the time, schools will crunch together the numbers ED1 and ED2, but occasionally we'll be able to find numbers. Like I think one year Vanderbilt like accidentally put out how many students they accept for ED2 and then quickly like deleted it, but the internet never forgets things. And so ED1 does tend to be a little bit more like advantageous than ED2 does. So, like, if one example is for Vanderbilt's class of 2026, they accepted 10%, 10.3% of their early decision two applicants, which is more than double like their regular decision acceptance rate, which is 4.7%. So it's still like a pretty good boost. But that being said, their early decision one acceptance rate was 24%. So no, that was a lot of numbers, but essentially like regular decision almost always will be like your lowest acceptance rate. Early decision one will give you like the biggest boost, and then ED2 tends to kind of fall in the middle somewhere.
So I know for Emory also, their regular decision acceptance rate is sitting at, just under 8%. But for ED1, it's at over 30%. So it is definitely a big jump for ED1. But then if we're looking at ED2, it's only 12. So you're not gaining much of an advantage from regular decision to ED2. So again, just kind of working out that strategy, like Lindsay was saying before, would definitely be important.
And these numbers do vary from year to year. Like I'm going to riff off of Emory because I know that they did have like a really big increase. Maybe it was like 2 years or so in their like early decision acceptance rate. Like they just like accepted a ton of kids, ED1 and ED2. And that's not always going to be the case. Like, sometimes application pools will vary from year to year. These numbers are definitely not set in stone. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of making your list. But one thing that is kind of always an absolute is that ED1 and ED2 applicants do tend to take a big portion of the incoming like freshman class. I know for like Pomona College, they filled more than half of their freshman class with ED1 and ED2 applicants. For Boston University, their early applicants took like 45% or so of their class of 2027 spots. So it
Wow.
definitely does take, yeah, it's an insane amount. It does take up a lot of their class.
Yeah, I think just definitely, prioritizing and when we're talking with a list, just keep it as another option. I don't think it gets talked about enough. Having worked in high schools for years and years, ED was always a discussion that we had. We always wanted to make sure parents were understanding what that meant and, understanding the implications there. But I don't think that ED2 is really talked about at the same time. And again, we don't want to wait for that ED1 rejection to start talking about like, well, I have to ED2 somewhere now.
I completely agree. I think that that's like the biggest thing is just like making sure to plan ahead and having realistic expectations too. So making sure to look at like, the average acceptance students like stats and like seeing if you're within reach of it. Like if your GPA is like a 3.6 and a lot of times you can kind of see the breakdown of their class. And if, 2% of their class had below like a 3.6, then maybe like, that's not your best ED shot because they're tending not to accept students like you, and you might be better spent applying somewhere else that kind of matches your stats, maybe slightly better. You don't want to be potentially right on. You might still want it to be a reach, but taking a look at what's going to be realistic for you, I think is really important. Taking that time to do this research and, looking at the full picture of the options. Cause if you only have, like, if you find out December 15th, sorry, that you got rejected from your ED1 option, means you only have 2 weeks to do a lot of research, looking at cost of attendance, looking at majors, looking at like, the options that are available at each school. A lot of schools are also closed during that time. Like the universities themselves are closed during that time. So they're not going to be there to like answer any questions that might pop up because, it's the holidays. So that's another big reason I think doing that research early can be helpful as well.
And try to get on campus. I feel like it's really hard to be fully committing to a school and saying, I'm coming here if I get accepted without a doubt if you've never stepped foot there.
Yes. Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I don't think you need to visit all the schools on your list, but your ED1 and your ED2 options, I do think are a good idea. This is hard to know. It's really hard to see, like, based on like the pretty images that they put on like Instagram, or even if like you talk to a couple of students that attended there, like they could have had a great experience, but then there could have also been students who didn't have as good of an experience.
Mhm.
Everyone's going to be unique. And so do your research. Don't make an emotional decision and don't feel rushed.
Definitely don't make an emotional decision and don't put all your eggs in one basket. It's an exciting thing to submit your, ED1 applications and your ED2 applications, and don't forget about those regular decision deadlines either. I know those acceptance rates are a little bit lower for some of the schools like we talked about, but those are just as important. So really staying track on those too.
Yeah, because they are the same time. They are really the same time. So even if, like, whenever you're working with like a Moon Pro counselor, we do encourage you to keep like working towards your regular decision schools, regardless of kind of what's going on with ED, like while we're waiting, because you don't, you need to have time to draft things. If you're applying to like, even if it's just 5 schools for regular decision or ED, an ED2 school plus 5 other schools, you could easily have like 15, 20 essays. If they have, 2 to 3 essays per school, it's a lot to do in 2 weeks. You don't have time to do drafts. There could be some repeats, but it could also mean that you have to write a lot of stuff from scratch and kind of scramble. That can
Yeah,
hinder.
and it could be a good way to like keep your mind off of it too. I know it's stressful waiting for that decision to come out, but I know last year I worked with a student and she applied ED1, and like we all know when the decisions are coming out basically, and we had drafts going through, we were editing back and forth and working through things, and we kind of held our breath. And that Saturday morning she emailed me like, I got in. So, kind of disregard the rest of my drafts that I sent you, and we're going to stop the process here because I am going to go like 100%. And it was super exciting. It was kind of sad to like abruptly, end our time together, but it was it was a cool experience. But we had still been working, day and day to get the
Mhm.
rest of our stuff done.
Yeah, definitely. I always think that's the best way to be successful is kind of that continuation after you ED1. It's definitely not a pause and wait game. It's we're going to continue on kind of game. Do you have a lot of kids who ED2 to schools?
I don't really typically get a lot of students at ED2, but I have almost every year students who almost get to that panic mode. Even if they didn't ED1, it's a lot of chatter at school, and maybe kids got into their ED1 choices and now like I should have ED'd, let me ED2, let me just pick somewhere. And it's not out of the right intentions. And I think I have like those difficult conversations every year. And ultimately, most of them don't end up doing an ED2 school. I think they kind of come down from that panic once we like really go through the options and kind of what's going on. But I think that's probably the more common thing.
So true. Yeah, I completely forgot about like the panic about what everyone else is doing. And then that like they find out that all their friends got into these amazing schools like UPenn or Cornell or WashU or wherever it might be. And they're like, oh, I don't have like anything good so far because it's still so early in the application process. And so yeah, I think that emotional panic like really hits them.
Yeah.
And
I think just like in order to combat that too, is like when you're doing your list over, maybe the late spring, early summer, really stay true to what your goals are, what your intentions are, what you want, and like be open to every and all things before you just make your final list. And then as your peers are getting these acceptances and have these other things happening for them, like being mindful and going back and reflecting, saying, okay, with these were my goals. This is what I want. And like success is measured differently. So kind of like
Yes.
reminding yourself as to why the list you had was your list and like why you didn't choose to do these schools or kind of what your goals are overall.
Completely agree. Stay true to who you are ultimately, I think is, and like what your goals are. Cause your friends' goals might not be BSMD. They could just be to get into a top, university, whatever it might be. And so for our BSMD students, I think it always adds like that wrinkle when it comes to both ED1 and ED2. Because I mean, especially when it comes to like ED2, at this point, you've put in a lot of work. You're potentially like, maybe starting to hear back from schools. I think rejections from BSMD programs tend to come in sometimes starting in December, and then a lot of the interviews, like requests and stuff like that, will start to come in January. And then, of course, like this is a very general timeline. There's definitely you get rejected in March, and you can get an interview request in March too. So like sometimes I feel like for our BSMD students, they start to see like, okay, I got rejected from Penn State. I didn't get an interview. I didn't, get moved on with Drexel. So, my in JIT, I didn't get into their honors college or, kind of whatever it might be. And they start to panic. And then I think that that's what turns them towards ED2 sometimes as well. Even though they've got like a big long list of other schools that they're still waiting to hear back from, they start to see it dwindle and then panic always seems to set in. Yeah, make decisions early. Make decisions early. I'm trying to think. I've had maybe like a handful, and handful might even be too many of students who've gone like early decision. They've gone to, I can remember like more of like the success stories more than anything else. Like I've had a girl she did get accepted to NYU early decision after her, I'm trying to remember where she ED'd to. I think maybe Columbia. She didn't get accepted there, but she did get into NYU for her ED2 decision. But what ended up happening with her actually is she didn't get accepted to the major she wanted. They have like a liberal arts core or something like that. So you're not really in a major for the first couple of years. And because she didn't get into like her neuroscience major, she wasn't like obligated to attend and didn't actually end up attending there because she actually got into UPenn anyway and went there for like her regular decision schools. And then I had a Wash U kid in St. Louis who did early decision and did get accepted early decision too and got accepted. But that's kind of it. Like I can remember like only like one or two others that did early decision too. I say it's like definitely less popular with our BSMD students just because like it feels like at that point like a little bit more of a risk to do too.
Yeah, I agree. Like if BSMD is ultimately your goal, maybe you have one ED school that you're like, okay, if anything, I'd choose this over BSMD, but I think it's kind of hard to say. I truly want BSMD and work all these hours and hours and hours on applications and then say, well, I'd rather do this instead.
And every student's going to be different. So don't judge,
Yes.
as we've said a million times, but I think that's like we always say like, if there's just one takeaway, then we say like six takeaways. But if there's just one takeaway from today, I think it's like making your plan early and like, having confidence in that plan too, because you should have put a lot of thought into your like college admission strategy. You should have put thought into the colleges that you're applying to. It should never have been like an emotional decision because I mean, I think emotion does play a role in it, but it should be like more fact-based and more like fit-based too. And so like those types of things I think are so key. And so make sure to stick to your guns and know that you're doing what's right for you, regardless of what else is like happening with your friends or what you read on the internet or things like that. Do you have anything else you want to add, Nicole?
I don't think so. Um, you know, Good luck to everyone on their ED1s and, this is the time to, if you haven't already, start thinking about ED2s, but
Yeah, and for our
yeah,
juniors,
nothing else.
you should be thinking about your college list now. Sophomores, it's not too early.
No, it's never too early. Never too early to visit either.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like if you're going like for the holidays, like, you're going to visit your family in Boston, stop by a college. Like, even if you can't necessarily, I don't know if they do them like over the holidays. I'm assuming no tours happen over the holidays, but if you can drive by and like, at least see what campus is like. But if you are visiting people during time when they are doing tours, stop by a place or, make a conscious decision to go do like a trip, like a college admissions trips during the year. And that will kind of, I think, just help throughout this process as well.
Yeah, I always tell younger students, like the one thing that you can absolutely be starting as early as possible is the college tours. Like the odds of major things changing in terms of like the way that it feels and the atmosphere and like all that It's really rare, and then even if it's a school that you don't even know, your grandparents live over here near this school, but you're not even sure that you would ever apply there, just go, check it out, like, get a feel. You have to have something to kind of base other things off of.
Yeah, completely agree. That's why I always tell kids too. It's like if there's a college nearby your house where you're like, well, I would never go there, still see, because then you can still see like size of the school. You can see like if there are things that you do, elements that you do like about the campus, or things that you like absolutely loathe. And then that can help your like college counselor figure out what's going to be best fit for you too as you go along, or like you figure out for yourself too about your colleges.
Yeah, highly recommend. Get on campus as much as possible and as many as possible. Sometimes doing tours, you're even, like, prompted with ideas that you never thought about that you can now think about toward other colleges.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, I think that those types of things are key, to be honest, and something that gets overlooked a lot of the times. Like I know that we all have some like seniors that sign up with us like in August and they won't have a college list ready. And so they are making emotional decisions. They are making like, last minute choices and like a lot is going on. But it's like our juniors and like our younger classmen are kind of listening to this podcast, start early so you don't kind of fall into learn from their mistakes essentially, and take that time to make these choices for yourself. It's expensive to go to college, and so you want to make sure you're investing kind of in the right areas. All right, so that's it for us today. Hopefully you learned a lot about early decision too. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but otherwise we'll be back in a couple weeks with more great BSMD and undergraduate admissions news.